Hi guys, it's Miss Simon. So I wanted to make this video today to help you guys out with science. So remember we talked about last week speed, okay? Remember to find speed, we do distance divided by time, okay? So last week we kind of focused on motion, so distance, time, calculating speed. Today and this week we're going to move on and we're going to focus on something we call forces. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. Remember, if I highlight it, you need to put it down in your notes. All right, so go ahead and in your notes, please, forces review. Forces review. All right, so I want us to take a look at these pictures and we can kind of see what are these people doing. Okay, so if we look at this character, what are they doing? Well, we can kind of clearly see that they are pulling something. They're pulling a rope. Then we look at this character. What is this character doing? So here we can clearly see that this character is pushing a box. So we have a character that's pulling and we have a character that is pushing. So when you push or pull something, you are using force. It's just that simple. Anytime you push or you pull anything, force is happening. All forces involve either a push or a pull, okay? Force is not something that you can see or touch. It is an action, okay? So go ahead and please write all of that down. That is very important. So when you push or pull something, you're using force. Any force involves a push or a pull. And it's not something that you can actually see or touch. It's an action that is happening. So simply put, force is a push or a pull. Forces can change the direction of an object, turn things, or change the shape of something. Okay, so it can change the direction of the object, it can change the shape of it, or it can turn things into other things. So for example, we see here that this force here is changing the direction of the ball. Him hitting it with the bat is now going to cause the ball to go the other direction. Okay. Also, we see in the second picture, the force of wind is causing this to turn, okay, this wheel to turn. And finally, this force of the person pushing down on the Play-Doh is changing the shape of the Play-Doh. So forces can change directions of things, turn things, or even change the shape of them. And the last thing we kind of need to know about forces is they're extremely important and they're found everywhere. Okay. Everywhere you look, you can find forces at play. Again, just simply a push or a pull, but they happen everywhere. All right, make sure we have that down in our notes. Moving on. So there's different types of forces and we divide them into two separate groups, okay? So types of forces, there are contact forces and distance forces. And I'm sure when you look at those two words, guys, we can kind of infer what they're talking about. Like contact. If you're in contact with something, that means you're touching it. If things are distant, it means that they're not touching. So the two types of forces that we have are contact forces and distant forces. Now in this picture, we see this is an example of contact forces. These two items are touching, okay? The mom is pushing and touching the baby. So contact forces occur when an object comes in contact with another object. Now the opposite, distant forces occur when two objects are not in contact with each other, okay? So we look at these magnets here, we can see that they're not touching, okay? So we call this a distant force because the two objects are not touching each other. So again, our two types of forces are contact forces and distant forces. Contact, they have to touch. Distance, they're not touching. All right, moving on. Now, here are your different types of contact forces, okay? And we'll get more specific into each one as we go. Today, we're just kind of introducing contact and distant forces. So, contact forces, the three types of contact forces are applied force, frictional force, and normal force. Go ahead and put that down in your notes. And then our three types of distance forces are electrical force, magnetic force, and gravitational force. And I'm sure you guys can, when you think of each of these forces, I'm sure you guys can think of some examples that we see all around us on a daily basis. So when we're looking at like applied force, so if you apply something, that means you're touching it, you're actually applying it. So applying forces, moving boxes, okay, pushing boxes, pushing on cars, pushing on anything, pulling a rope. Those are all going to be examples of applied forces. Now, distant forces, we look at magnets being put on boards, okay, or the electricity that's flowing through your house, or the fact that we are standing on Earth and not floating in space. Those are all examples of those distant forces. So again, we have contact and distance, and then we break those down even more. Now, just like we learned in our last week that we can measure distance in, say, meters, in time, in seconds, we can also measure force in a unit that we call newtons. Okay, so go ahead and put that down in our notes, please. Measuring force. We measure force in a unit called newton. And specifically, a newton is how much force is required to make a mass of 1 kilogram go faster at a rate of 1 meter per second. So, how much force is required to make that object move at 1 meter per second? So, again, we measure force in a unit called Newton. Okay, and where have you guys heard of Newton before? Think about it. I'm sure you guys have heard of the word Newton. Where have you heard it before? If you said he is a scientist, you are correct. We've heard of Newton's 3 laws, okay, which we will discuss later on in this unit. All right, so which of the following is not true about forces? Not true. Forces can change the motion of an object. Pulling is the only type of force that impacts an object. A force is an action you cannot see or touch, or forces can change the shape of things, which is not true. If you said B, pulling is the only type of force that impacts an object, you are correct. Remember, force is a push or a pull. Force is measured by what? Meters per second, joules, kilograms, or newtons. You said newtons. We just learned that you are correct. The picture is an example of what type of force. Is it going to be a distance force or a contact force? If you said contact force, you are correct. In the picture, you should see that he is pulling the wagon. He is coming in contact with a wagon and pulling it, so that's going to be a contact force. All right, so that's as far as we're going to go today, guys. Tomorrow, we're going to get into the specific 3 types of contact forces and what each one is. So I hope that this video was helpful. And remember, force is a push or a pull, and we measure force in newtons. Bye, guys.